I would like to acknowledge the country on which we're meeting today. And for me, that's the custodial lands of the Dja Dja Wurrung people. These lands have never been ceded. I'll invite you to pop in the chat, the country on which you are today, to ensure that we've got good coverage and acknowledgement. But with this acknowledgement, I also pay my respects to the elders, those past and present, and acknowledge their ongoing living culture and the contributions that they make to the life of the region. We recognise the strength and the resilience of all Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples. And I acknowledge the invitation that was made through the Uluru Statement of the Heart to listen, to walk together with truth-telling, seeking justice and self-determination in a movement of all Australian people for a better future together.
Thanks, Trisha. So as I mentioned, it's beautiful watching everybody put what country they're coming in from. It really gives that sense of that regional event that we're all participating in today. Welcome, welcome everyone. This is the second session of our Care Conversations, as I mentioned, and there's a focus on masculinities and engaging men in change. In this session, we're exploring men's role in change and also men's experiences of engaging in change. And the care framework holds a space for supporting primary prevention of violence against women in the Loddon Mallee region. And within that framework, masculinities is one of the 5 areas of focus. So for those who may have missed the first session, Care Conversations provides a platform to highlight some of the great primary prevention work happening across the region. And you can catch that first session on our website, which was recorded if you would like to. And the final session will be on the 31st. And so you can register for that if you haven't already via our website, I believe. So it's all about connecting us, growing our understanding of each other's work and developing that shared language to talk about primary prevention and energising us, which, you know, in the current situation, we all need as much energising in this space as possible. And today we welcome groups leading projects which span Mount Alexander and Central Goldfields Shires, as well as Campaspe LGA. And thank you to Steph, who'll be helping out with the technical side of things today, and she'll keep an eye on the chat. So if you have any questions, she'll respond to that. If during the presentations today you feel the need to reach out for some support, please feel free to take a break or access one of the supports. I think Steph will be sharing in the chat shortly, the 1-800 RESPECT number. We hope to have some time at the end of each presentation for Q&A. It's a little bit tight, so encourage you again to use the chat function to ask questions. And if we run out of time, I'm really happy to collect questions and pass them on to our presenters and get back to you if you'd like to do that. So I'd love to introduce now Emma Brentnall from Campaspe PCP, who's going to share a wonderful community co-design project which develops some personas. Thanks, Emma.
Thanks, Hayley. I hope you can all hear me okay. And firstly, I'd also like to acknowledge the beautiful lands on which we're meeting today. I'm in Rochester today, so a combination of Yorta Yorta, Tangarung and Dja Dja Wurrung country. I am probably not the person you'd be expecting to see this project presented from, because I feel a bit of an imposter today because I wasn't involved directly in the co-design team. However, I would like to acknowledge the team members that did participate in this. Firstly, I'll just share my screen for the presentation. Can you all see that? Yeah, here we go. So, as Hayley mentioned, I'm chatting today about our co-design project around gender equality, which was authored by Campaspe PCP. and involved our local providers and a local team. So the people that were involved in the team, I'd like to acknowledge those. Tracy Pearson, who was our Prevention Health Promotion Manager, Danielle Patterson, Population Health Manager at Echuca Regional Health, Jacinta Masters, Health Promotion at Echuca Regional Health also, Jessica Ibsen, Community Programs at Campaspe Shire Council, Katie McKee, who used to be with Women's Health Loddon Mallee, and Danae Rush at Kyabram District Health Service Health Promotion Officer. So they were the co-design team original group, and we've had a bit of change in staff movement since that time that this commenced back in 2018. So all of those people, unfortunately, are not available to present today, which is why I've landed with the gig. So I'm just going to talk through what that process involved, and if any of you are familiar with the co-design methodology, that's exactly what this slide really is showing. We titled our work Campaspe Together for Equality, and it's come under and aligned to our Campaspe Health Promotion and Prevention Plan, and also the Campaspe Family Violence Action Group, for which gender equality is one of our key priorities. So to kick off the co-design, we really commenced at that defining the problem, that phase one, defining the problem, immersion and discovery. So that process involved individual conversations with over 120 people, and that included key stakeholders, community members, and included about 11 groups within that 120 as well. So the real purpose of this phase was to look at those values, attitudes and beliefs, and really get an immersion of what they look like. Phase two of the project or initiative looked at the synthesis and research of those findings, and that's what I'm going to chat a little bit more about now, is what those insights then informed us developing up some personas, and those personas were really enlightening to describe where men's attitudes and beliefs were at the moment as well. So of all those conversations, the personas were then a melding together of some of those insights into each of those conversations. So for example, Josh, and the learning here is the teachers and adults can be great role models. Josh is an adolescent in year 12 at school. On a home front, he finds that it's quite equal in his relationships with his sister, and his parents are encouraging of who does the household chores. But really interestingly, some of the insights were more around the school and how teachers weren't necessarily reinforcing the attitudes and beliefs that they were feeling at home or experiencing at home. So for example, teachers are still asking for strong boys to assist in moving furniture. And there was some resistance to boys participating in female orientated sports, so for example, netball. So some of the comments that those interviews elicited were things like "man up," that's not a boys' sport. So really looking at how that affects attitudes and behaviours, and the young adolescents that we spoke to were really enforcing that boys and girls should be treated the same. That's what they're learning in the Respectful Relationships program, but finding that missing link between what they then are experiencing from a teacher environment or a school environment. We also developed some needs and expectations around each of these personas as well, so that's then helped to form our strategy development from here. The second persona was Jake, who's an unexpected change champion for gender equality. Jake's a tradie. He sees gender inequality as a big problem. It's not just being a women's problem, it's a family and community problem. So Jake works in a male-dominated environment, learns more and more about inequalities by his girlfriend. So his girlfriend pointing out things to him on a daily basis about the inequalities she's experiencing. And he's finding that really insightful to learn that. She plays footy, his girlfriend, and he, notices she has to get changed in her car because she's not comfortable doing that in the male change rooms. And he's finding more and more as he's learning about this that there's that disrespect discussion at his male-dominated workforce. So really conscious about the comments being made in a job environment. So he's starting to get more uncomfortable with how that looks like and what that disrespect looks like, particularly from older blokes who are worse than the younger ones. So he's really expressed that need to see women getting more respect at date of birth and wants everyone to be able to have a fair go. Keen to see some changes at the footy club to make facilities more respectful and appropriate. The third persona is Tim, who really is around, his insights were around enabling family to be happy and healthy. But at the same time, really feeling a bit threatened and around questioning of family values and the way he was brought up. So Tim's the father of 2 boys, works full-time. His wife works part-time after returning to work after maternity leave. He does most of the outside chores at home and his wife more on the inside chores, but really finds some of the questioning around stereotypes as a question on the morality of how he was raised and was that a wrong way of being raised. So this one's, I think, a bit more challenging for folks to query, I guess, feeling more criticised about that and wants to think about how we can have more supportive language, more so than feeling like he's being criticised. So the needs and expectations expressed through this persona were around helping to understand gender equality and what it means for a family life. Need more conversations about gender equality to be supportive language and have more conversation that's safe and to have open discussion. So those 3 personas were what we used to then form up where we'd be putting most of our effort into strategy at a local level. So our co-design project is depicted through this slide, which really looks at the themes around culture, community, role models, behaviour and language. So the 4 strategies we've been implementing since the original insights and design phase is really supporting workplace policies and procedures, and the Gender Equality Act is no doubt certainly given that the green light to go ahead much more strongly. The second area was around gender equality and bystander training, and Women's Health Loddon Mallee have supported our local networks to participate in that training over the last more than 2 years. So we've had some really good participation rates in those. The third area, which we've been focusing on a lot in the last 6 months, has been around designing social marketing and communication strategy. And some of that has been around developing animations, which are around challenging these attitudes and beliefs. And the 4th strategy is looking at identifying opportunities to deliver healthy masculinities for men and boys. And we weren't successful with getting some of that healthy masculinities funding from Vic Health, but I know some of our colleagues are, so we're watching that space quite intently to see where we can go next. What I'll share with you next is the process we've been going through to develop up the digital stories and the animation. Originally, we thought we would do these with actors and local actors in local settings and use them as a way to engage local communities more. But we were really conscious as we were evolving through about how that might be perceived, and really went with the option and decision to go with animation to take away some of that personal factor. So I think there's benefits to both, but we just felt that some of the messaging might be better received through an animation instead. So the 5 digital scenarios developed were based on the personas and some of that feedback and insights we found through the co-design consultation. The 5 scenarios we're looking at is a classroom, the second one is sporting club, the third one hub setting, fourth one workplace, and fifth around healthy masculinity. Now we thought we'd get all these done in 6 months. Big learning, that takes much longer than that from our end. And mainly due to just having many priorities and actions happening at the same time. The team developed up these storyboards, so they really looked at that scenario, what some of that language and scripts might look like, and yeah, so we've done that for each of them. We then, after working out we wanted the animation, went to preparing them with a marketing company. So bear with me as I'm just going to have to switch screens here. So just hold 2 seconds while we get this done. I'm going to share with you the 2 animations we've developed so far. These haven't been released. I've only downloaded these from the consultants this week. So we have tested these with quite a few local contacts, males, and through the design team themselves. But I'm really curious if there's any particular feedback people have. Happy to accept that in the chat. We've had a team of 4 staff members go over these and each minute word and detail, but we are always open to feedback to see how they might be received when you haven't, with fresh eyes, I guess is what I'm getting at. So 2 seconds, this should hopefully work.
Hey, hun, can I get some money for another drink, please?
You've already had 2 drinks. I don't work for you to spend all my damn money.
Why does she put up with him?
She's not working. She only looks after the kids. Can't expect too much.
It'll come out of your allowance.
An allowance? What for? Maybe I'll just get a soft drink.
What would you say? Say something. Come on, mate. It's not the 1950s. Isn't it a team effort?
It's not easy staying at home with the kids.
Thank goodness someone said something.
Stand up for equality. For sexual assault, domestic and family violence counselling services, call 1-800-RESPECT. Or if you need more information on where to seek help in your area, or want to see what the Campaspe community is doing to prevent family violence, visit campaspefamilyviolence.org.au.
So you can see with that one, we've got that first scenario and then the second scenario, and clearly a bit of a plug to link the work to our
You can't expect your team to manage
our local action group as well at the end there. I'll just go through the second one now so you can have a sense of what the healthy masculinity clip looks like.
Hey, what's up with you today? You're being soft. Harden up, mate.
Things aren't great at home, mate. It's been a rough week.
Jesus, mate. Man up. Surely you've got more important things to worry about.
The man box is a set of beliefs within and across society that places pressure on men to be a certain way, to be tough, not show emotion, to be the breadwinner, to always be in control, use violence to solve problems. Let's look outside the man box.
Hey, what's up with you today?
Things aren't good at home. It's been a rough week. Got the black dog today.
Yeah, black dog battles are tough. I struggle with them too, mate.
Is there anything we can do to help? My GP helped me through some of the heavy stuff.
Unfortunately, there's still pressure on men to live up to traditional masculine stereotypes and to suppress parts of themselves that don't fit the cliche. These outdated ideas of manhood lead to high rates of depression and suicide, and also contribute to violence against women. It's time we freed men from outdated masculine stereotypes and supported them in equality, respect, non-violence, vulnerability, and emotional expression, to break free from unhealthy masculine stereotypes. For more information and support, call Men's Line on 1300 78 99 78.
So that's our clips as we've got to them at this stage. Our plan is to, we've got a common plan to release all those and share them with communities, and then do some evaluation of how that's received. And that's the stage essentially that we're up to.
Thanks, Emma. So we got an exclusive showing just now.
Yeah, you could say that.
I think that's really phenomenal work, you know, linking the voice of the community, which, you know, there was so much work to find out attitudes and beliefs from your specific communities, and then, you know, to produce a resource that really reflects what's going on there. And I know that the Women's Health Atlas statistics in the Campaspe are quite high in regards to the stat around believing that men should be heads of the household, or I'm probably not wording it exactly right, but yeah, I believe Campaspe is quite high in agreement with that statement. So how do you have some like top tips or considerations when you go to engage community in these types of conversations, and particularly engaging men? How do you go about that?
Yeah, look, that was something we were really conscious of. You know, being a bit of a wicked problem back in 2018, we were really, you know, this is how do we start these conversations? And, you know, when we did a co-design based on healthy eating, active living, that's much more easier conversation to have a discourse in than gender equity. So we actually engaged a human-centered design company to do mentoring for the team. And they did that for a good 6 months, I think. So really challenged and supported them with the how to do co-design in a really tricky topic area. So that really expressed, you know, the design and the questions to be asking in that consultation phases as well. So from my perspective, I wasn't involved clearly in that mentoring component. The original team were, but yeah, I just thought of how can we support the team to do this where they feel safe and supported to have those conversations. So really looked at that outside expertise I think could support the process.
That's interesting, because I was taken by Tim's persona where you mentioned that he had felt a bit threatened about, you know, his upbringing and what these conversations sort of meant for him. And I think that in order for him to be able to say those things, he must have felt safe too in that process. So can you tell us a bit more about making that safe space?
Look, I would have to, in all honesty, Hayley, reflect back to the team on how they did that. But certainly, you know, sharing purpose of what the conversations were, and the questioning was really framed in how might we change, or how might we understand this more, more so than trying to generate specific responses. It was very open-ended questioning and very safe questions to ask that provided that safe space to speak about their experience. And yeah, without having one of the other team members who actually did the consults, I probably couldn't give you more than that. But I'll try and find that and share that.
Yeah, no problem. Are there any questions in the chat, Steph? Do we have any questions there?
There's a couple of suggestions which happy to take on board with some of the terminology. So that's fantastic. Thank you.
Excellent. Excellent. Well, if there are no more questions for Emma, we might move on, I think. And thank you very much, Emma. That was really, really interesting. I'd like to now introduce Carolyn Neilson, or I'll actually put it to Carolyn and Alex. Who would like to go first?
After you, Kaz.
Yeah, is that all right? Yeah.
Yep.
That's gender equality for you.
Right. Thanks, Alex.
Thanks.
So I'd like to introduce Carolyn Neilson, who has headed up our It's About Humanity, Not Gender Stereotypes project across Mount Alexander and Central Goldfields Shire.
Thank you, Hayley. And thanks so much for organising this, Hayley. I think it's so important we're able to have these really important conversations, you know, and grapple with the complexity. And but before I start, I'd like to acknowledge the traditional custodians of the land I'm meeting on, the Jara people of the Jaggerung Nation, who have cared for this land since the beginning. And I'd like to acknowledge they never ceded sovereignty of this land. This land is, was, and always will be Aboriginal land. And I thank them. And I'm very grateful for them sharing so generously their culture, including stories of respect and equity. I pay my respects to their elders past, present and emerging. So thank you, and thanks to everybody for zooming in. I'm not sure if Hayley's got Scottish subtitles in this, so hopefully I'll try not to speak too quickly. But yeah, I'm Carolyn Neilson. I work with Central Victorian Primary Care Partnership, and one of my roles is coordinating this project, whose title, after a lot of consideration, is It's About Humanity, Not Gender Stereotypes. And the sort of tagline that sits under that is what our sort of key message is, that greater equality and the breakdown of gender norms gives everyone more opportunities to develop to their full capacity as respectful, caring human beings who can express their emotions and seek help when needed. A long tagline, but we felt that we had to have that sort of entirety there. And so this project really has come out of this emerging understanding of the great theory around in the masculinity space. So our watch, Vic Health, and then some great work around with Shelley Houston in terms of working together with men in the prevention of violence against women space. So as Hayley said, we're working across two shires, Central Goldfields Shire and Mount Alexander Shires. And we had steering committees sort of guiding this work. So, and steering committees, women, men, non-binary, service providers and community members. So, and I think there was a reasonably good sort of shared understanding of the theory before we started to really think, right, how can we get our hands dirty in this work? Yes, Steph, you can go to the next slide. Thank you. Yeah. So so in Central Goldfields Shire, the project really sat a bit more under the suicide prevention space, and in Mount Alexander Shire in the family violence space, recognizing though that breaking down gender stereotypes, you know, we're really looking at the impacts these rigid gender stereotypes have on mental health, suicide ideation and family violence. And look, the reason we actually came up with that title, sorry Steph, I've probably gone a bit too fast, but it's about humanity, not gender stereotypes. In the earlier conversations we're having with our respective communities, we realized that the terminology masculinities just felt a little bit too binary for people. So we're being sort of place-based. We're going where our community's at and the understanding. And also there was a little bit talking to schools, talking to men, young men. There seemed to be a bit of fatigue around the language around toxic masculinities and healthy masculinities. So we sort of realized for our communities, we had to sort of come up with different language. And I think language is very, very important, and approaches. So that's a little bit of an explanation around the title and our approach and language. Interestingly enough, back to the second slide, Steph. Thanks. interestingly enough, there was a title suggested, Manly is a beach in Sydney, which we thought was great, but just a little bit, that was more a humorous one. But there was a lot of consideration about this title. It was a work in progress for quite a long time. But I think the important thing was that that conversation was really important, because it enabled us as groups of people to really have a kind of shared sense of purpose and kind of position around how do we do this. So and this project sort of started earlier this year, and at the start we thought we didn't have an awful lot of time, so we had to be sort of strategic and have a think. And I'm a canny Scotswoman, so I'm all about picking low-hanging fruit, not compromising on what we're wanting to do and what our key messages are. But so we were scoping in both shires, scoping to see what's going on at the moment in this space that we can build on. Again, not compromising what we're about, but what's going on. And certainly we had the Department of Education on our steering committees, and the Respectful Relationships curriculum, you're probably all aware of that, has some modules around generally sort of mental health, emotional intelligence, emotional safety, but there are 2 modules on gender diversity, gender equity, and breaking down gender stereotypes or gender diversity. So talking to the schools, we realized that they acknowledge the Respectful Relationships is a great starting point, a great framework, but as Emma sort of touched on, you need resources, you need role models, and certainly the schools were saying they can access a great deal of resources, but what they felt they lacked was role models young students know and respect, to talk the talk and walk the talk, and almost be in the classrooms with them, explaining why they are challenging gender stereotypes and why they're promoting gender equality. So, and certainly in Mount Alexander Shire, we realized that there was some work. There were some people, men, non-binary people, who were already in their life practice or in wage and unwage work, breaking down these rigid gender stereotypes. So we had Billy Barefoot, who's a dance teacher and a dancer, and he uses the medium of dance to really break down gender stereotypes. We had Rain here in the photograph. He's a leader in the CFA. We had Cam, who is a leader in the rites of passage for men and boys, and now transgender and non-binary people. We had Jez Forbes, who leads the charity Hope Assistance Local Tradies, which is around addressing mental health challenges for the male sector tradies. So there were, and a dad from a dad support group in a primary school. So we thought, well, if we can have a bit more of a deep dive with some of these community members, then we can also develop some video resources for our schools to enhance the Respectful Relationships curriculum. So it's almost like these people are coming into the classroom, which ultimately we'd love to have happen. But in the meantime, we can have these video resources. So we sort of arranged these interviews with these community members and a non-binary Indigenous woman. And I'll talk a little bit about the importance of intersectionality in the next slide, but continuing with this slide, the other activities we've been progressing with the schools, so Maryborough Education Centre and Castlemaine Secondary College, are the Portraits for Respect. And you're probably all aware of this kind of activity that basically enables people to take a stand. And it's sort of really building on that peer education model. But you are invited to write a handwritten message on a particular theme. So we've done it in family violence, and we're inviting these young students to write their messages on breaking the importance of breaking down outdated gender stereotypes. And the way we did that was we have a session where we have a discussion around these young people recognize the gender stereotypes they see in their day-to-day living. So we brainstorm that, we have a conversation around that. Then we have a conversation around the impacts that has on them and their community as they see it. And then we sort of visualize a world free of those impacts and those gender sort of stereotypes. And the young students, certainly in the schools, really felt these discussions, they didn't want to have them, they wanted all genders together. So we had young female students, young male students, and those identifying as non-binary in the room together, having these conversations. And we decided on an inter-age format. So at MEC, we had leaders from primary 6 in with these older students, and great conversations. It's really humbling being in this space a lot of the time. So that was what we did with the kids with Portraits for Respect. And I'll touch on this in another slide. I think there was a conversation around the concern that some of these activities can be seen to be tokenistic. But we, again, while we were planning these activities, we really wanted it to build on an integrated approach. So the Respectful Relationships curriculum has a whole series of other activities. And this is certainly giving the young people a sense of agency, and the schools are building on these activities. So for example, in Castlemaine Secondary College, they're now doing train the teacher on how to respond to certain types of discrimination, including sex and gender. So there's a whole, it's building, we're building and it's integrating. In CSC, they're also looking at the possibility, they're talking to the drama teachers about challenging these outdated stereotypes in Year 8 dance. And I hopefully don't have to do anything to do with that. That's up to the students. I'm not a great dancer. So touched on the video interviews. Certainly the interviews too will be used in social media, and we can use them as a rolling videos during events like the 16 days of prevention of violence against women. So ongoing use for them. With Jeremy Forbes too, Hope Assistance Local Tradies sessions, what we've done is we've linked him in with the schools, because he does these amazing sessions, you've probably heard of him, really challenging the sort of outdated stereotypes that can lead to mental health issues in the male tradie sector. So he's sort of tweaked those sessions, and he's doing those sessions for VCAL students at the schools. I would love to, this is all a work in progress. We're trying to be sort of agile in the space according to what we hear, or what we think hopefully what we hear, and we're listening well. But I think it'd be really good to do a future forum, certainly Mount Alexander Shire, and invite Central Goldfields Shire. We try to do a bit of cross-shire collaboration, but acknowledging the place-based needs of both communities. But a future forum with all these participants or representatives certainly in the room together, to really continue the conversation on how we do this important work in our communities. The other thing with Castlemaine Secondary College was that our young students really wanted to invite trusted community members into the space. So we've recognized, Emma sort of touched on some of that sort of the whole of community, but they wanted to invite people from, say, major employers in town, councillors, sports clubs, dance studios, some other sectors. And I think these people we trust, they have a bit of integrity about this movement. So we've invited them into the space and got some really favorable results. So, the young people get it. This is a whole of community movement. It's a whole of community social change we're actually part of. So that's pretty exciting. Young people kind of know how to do this, I reckon. We should just handball it to them. I think, next slide. Thanks, Steph. So really, in this work, challenging these outdated gender stereotypes, I think, we've had some, I think some really good, honest, robust conversations. And I think that's where, having a bit of a steering committee and people feel safe to really have these challenging conversations, that we're moving out of our comfort zone. How do we do this work as a community? I think engaging with community influencers and appropriate ones is kind of essential in an ongoing way. So Jeremy Forbes, he's the man at the top, Hope Assistance Local Tradies. So we interviewed him, and he's also involved in the Portraits for Respect activity. Another redhead, we're keeping the redhead quota up. I think and this is an ongoing conversation we're having, but it's an interesting one. And I've heard some of the masculinities experts talk about this too, that, more and more we're realizing this is a values-based conversation, but we're also really wanting to reflect on gender privilege. And certainly some of the young students are saying, we also want to reflect on the other privileges of class, race, and ability. So there's a complexity there that I didn't want to shy away from. I've touched on right from the start, you know, if we were hearing people correctly, they really wanted to have a strong intersectional lens on this work, that it's not binary. And I think it's not saying that they may not want to do, say, some work with the Tomorrow Man or the Tomorrow Woman program at some point, but they felt from the start they wanted to be as inclusive as we could be. And what does that look like in your community? Certainly, language and approaches, I've touched on that. You know where to meet the men we were engaging with, know how and where to meet them, how to have those conversations. Language really important. Know where your community's at, certainly really important. I live in Castlemaine and Mount Alexander Shire. I think I've got a reasonable sense of my community. I've got relationships with people here. Central Goldfields Shire, I don't have that same status or position, but I really trusted the teacher at MEC is a member of her community. So she knew what was possible in her school, and she linked Jeremy Forbes up with her community. So those community influencers, those trusted people that know their community, I think are essential. This is social change. This is major social change. It's a major social change movement. We all need to be part of it. And I'll talk a little bit more about this. Moving at the speed of trust. We all have a sense of agency and urgency about this. We're living in a very daunting landscape. But I think we all agreed trust needs to be part of that. You know, trusted relationships, they're priceless in this social change. Having a mullet hairstyle is incredibly important. Cooper, this young fella in the bottom of the slide, he's a great little fella. And I don't know if you can read it, but I think his message was, you can be whoever you want to be despite your gender, or regardless of gender. And he had a mullet. And when I first walked into the classroom, and I'm not a teacher, I don't work a lot with youth, but he was great. He went, "Oh, fantastic mullet, miss." And I was in, and at the end of the session, he asked me to shake my mullet. So that was a defining moment for me. Next slide, thanks. Thank you. So this is just a bit of a visual of, and it sort of aligned the social change model, and it sort of aligns with what framing, you know, the Framing Masculinities guide. You know, we've got that middle 68% or whatever that are kind of the persuadables. I'm not sure about the terminology of laggards. I think we could be, anyway, there you go. And the early adopters and the innovators. And sorry, I meant to mention too, sorry, in the activities we're doing, we've, you know, it's been really great the last couple of months linking in with, you're going to hear from Alex soon. You know, there was a men's group that's self-organized and self-mobilized, and we sort of linked in with them. So that's been a really good sort of part or alignment. And so we're just acknowledging, you know, the innovators, the early adopters, and I'm not always for following models, but I think this gives us a sense of what we're trying to achieve and how it kind of needs arguably to be in a whole of community approach. And when do we draw the line? Like how much do we give to getting the laggards on board? I think that's the real tension in the movement, and engaging with that so-called vocal opposition, and recognizing, you know, legislation, Gender Equality Act is all part of this social change. Next slide, thanks, Steph. So this is a picture of Billy Barefoot. He's an amazing dancer, hip hop dancer. And he's taught some of my kids and other kids in Mount Alexander Shire, but he very much talks about challenging gender stereotypes, and he uses dance as that medium. You know, dances where young men, non-binary women can all express emotions, and they should feel safe to do that. So, so I think in terms of engaging men, our work, inextricably, it's linked to engaging men as allies, but it's been more engaging men in terms of breaking down gender stereotypes, and it's all linked. But as I said, go where they're safe and they feel safe to express and begin these conversations and feel they're into it. I think the whole of community approach was something our steering committees really advocated from the start. This element of, you know, bringing accountability into how you do this work. You know, we're all having to learn and grow, and it's not tokenistic. You know, what does accountability look like, and how do we build this? Quite an emerging comment, I suppose, from the men we interviewed was this tension, like, and Emma, and I saw in the animations, you know, where do you draw the line? When do you actually speak out, and how do you speak out? And certainly there's tension between compassion, understanding, but calling out that inappropriate behavior. So certainly, how do we do that? Building on the relationships we have with these men that are arguably, you know, displaying inappropriate behavior. And I think certainly Paul Zappa from the Masculinities mob talks about this compassion, understanding, and compassionate consequences. So that's an interesting conversation in itself, I think. Certainly, look, I know we're not meant to pander to the vocal opposition, but I think some sort of engagement and reflective listening to understand where they're coming from is important. And we're saying we don't have to compromise that, our messaging, but I think in order for it not to become divisive, how do we listen to those men that are oppositional and displaying what we would say is rigid, outdated, stereotypical behavior? And credit to Hayley, you know, this, I think, a regional framework, these opportunities to share stories and experiences and figure out how do we grapple with this work and navigate our way through what can be quite a daunting landscape. And acknowledging then within that the place-based satellites of social change. Next slide, Steph. Thank you. So, and these, this is, so two of these people, Will and Ira, we've interviewed. Ira is an Indigenous Burkinji Gunjit Mara non-binary person. Will's a young fella. And look, what worked well, we haven't really evaluated the project so far, and it's ongoing. We've only been doing it a few months, but I think listening to young people and listening even the interviews, you know, giving a sense of agency to people, you know, that yes, they can do the respectful relationships curriculum, and that's great, but we're actually inviting them to take a stand and be agents of change. And I think that's really important. And I think this project was quite timely as well, because you know, it was sort of reaching that tipping point in terms of the landscape we're living in and violence against women. Hearing diverse voices, I think our stakeholders were very much about that diversity and integrating and building on other work and those connections to community influencers. And just a couple of quotes to end from a couple of young students around doing the portraits for respect. They thought it was important to start young, freeing from those rigid stereotypes, and it felt really good. They enjoyed letting the world know how they feel. So, and I think young people can certainly show us the way.
Thanks, Caroline.
Yeah, thanks, Hayley. Sorry, I went a bit over.
That's absolutely fine. As always, you're bringing up such important points, and it's fascinating. I have a million questions for you, and I think others would probably have some questions, but I want to move on to Alex to give him some time to describe his experience. And I guess he's representing a group of local men who've come together to explore how they can help reduce men's violence towards women. So I'll hand it over to you, Alex, and
yeah, thanks Hayley, and thanks Kaz and Emma and everybody else who's doing so much of this work that we as a group are learning is so challenging. I'm just going to give you a really quick snapshot of why I'm here and what I'm representing. So around the time that Brittany Higgins news from Parliament House started to hit the media, I think back in March, there was a group of us, one of our friends, Johan, put out a message to a few people saying that he was really concerned about these stories that keep coming out, and are there any men out there who would like to get together to talk about it, which is a pretty unusual opportunity he created, but he did. There's a few of us who put our hands up and ended up meeting at a local pub here to talk about it, which is great. Just a relaxed setting, but we really quickly understood from each other that we were over it. You know, we were concerned and all feeling as if we weren't active in doing anything about it. And so we began talking about how could we. So we went from this informal setting in the pub to a more formal setting, actually having a meeting and trying to take minutes and things like that. And we were a really diverse group of, I don't know, maybe 15 guys quite quickly. Diverse age range from maybe late 20s to possibly 60s. Guys from different nationalities, different countries, different backgrounds, different work backgrounds, from rural settings originally or from metro settings. So it was a group of guys who, very diverse, didn't really know each other that well, but were unified around this desire to do something. So a few meetings downstream, we quite quickly figured out that we had a big idea to show some public support, to show that there are men out there who would like to do something, or at least just acknowledge or show that we're here. We were all initially really excited about that idea and started moving down that path, but part of what we talked about together was the need to get women's voices into our conversations. So we very intentionally started going home, and those of us who have female partners and anybody else really who had an opinion started asking questions at home or with groups of friends, bringing them back and feeding them into our meetings. And that's when I guess some division began to emerge, and it became very obvious quite quickly how different a place we were all starting from. So we had men in the group who had been around in these spaces, protesting, being quite active for years. We had, on the other end of the spectrum, guys who were just starting to scratch the surface of this stuff and understand, well, there's something going on. So the motivations and the experiences and experience was very different in the room quite quickly. From there, I guess things have slowed down quite a bit. There's a core group of us who are still just managing to tap it along. We've been really grateful for the networking opportunities that have been set up by Kaz. This is where I met Kaz through the program she mentioned before, and I met Haley through that as well. So we are still a group of people, guys who are communicating with each other, and we are tapped into networks. But I think the feeling is that we've stalled because we all have commitments outside of what we're doing here. Time is difficult. We don't really have a structure to adhere to. I think we all really like the idea of being active, but it doesn't feel obvious how. And when we do have ideas, the opinion kind of falls to both sides of those ideas because there's different ways of thinking about this, and it makes a lot of sense. But in terms of getting traction and moving somewhere with it, it makes it a bit difficult. So yeah, I guess that's the snapshot for you.
Can I ask a question, Alex? I'm just thinking of what Kaz was saying about, creating that safety and safe place, and then what you said about the men in the group being sometimes at quite opposite ends of the spectrum in terms of understanding and involvement with gender equality conversations and that sort of thing. So with the division, or like, I know that we've had a conversation about this before, and you've reflected to me that some of the men have already done quite a lot of reflecting, and then some of the other men are kind of at that stage where they're entering that phase of reflection. And so how can men support each other, do you think, through reflecting on privilege and you know, reassessing gender equality, do you think?
Yeah, well, I think that it takes courage from certain people. You know, I think we follow good leadership, and we follow courage. So it does take people to be bold in certain spaces, to speak in certain ways, you know, where perhaps certain conversations aren't really being had. But it can't be confrontational either, you know. It's so easy for things to be inflamed very, very quickly, because so many men, I think, are quite defensive. That's one of the problems, I think, with the term toxic masculinities. They mistakenly read it as saying that it's bad to be a man, but that's, you know, to understand that term in itself takes some nuanced understanding, and not everyone has that. So just getting a group of men around a table that didn't know each other, I think was an achievement in itself early on, but without a kind of a structure, perhaps, and people who are really switched on to how to create a sense of cohesion and really strong welcoming, you know, in terms of leading a group like that, it kind of, you know, we're just feeling our way. But it did feel a bit uncomfortable, and it did feel awkward, and it felt at times that there was some pretty extreme sensitivities that needed care, but we were just fumbling our way through. And I think there was a shared feeling that we at times weren't prepared for that as a group. You know, without, you know, Kaz talked so much about relationships. I think that's so key. You need to have a relationship in order to move anywhere, because until that point where we're just a bunch of guys who are kind of scared to move at the moment, you know.
Yeah. And for me, what you're saying makes me reflect, and perhaps other practitioners in primary prevention space reflect on, do we have the skills to hold men's discomfort and vulnerability and, you know, defensiveness? Do we have skills, or do we need skills that we haven't yet developed? Because this is such an emerging space. I am fascinated by this conversation, and I am also aware that we are a couple of minutes to midday, which I can't believe it's gone so quickly, because it's been brilliant.